Hey everyone, welcome back to our biblical storyline journey. This week we're diving into chapter 5 of Robert's God's Big Picture, covering the prophesied kingdom. We've been reading through Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, and the post-exilic books like Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Daniel. This phase is unique. It's not about new events, but about how God's people responded to exile and clung to hope. So what exactly is the prophesied kingdom? This phase covers the exile and the early return to the land. The kingdom seems shattered. No king on David's throne, the temple destroyed, the people under foreign rule. Yet through prophets and wisdom writers, God keeps speaking promises and hope into the darkness. The key aspect here is that the kingdom is prophesied, held out as a future hope rather than a present reality. God's people are living between judgment and restoration, and these scriptures sustain their faith by pointing forward to a coming king who will make all things right. Let me walk you through how this literature functions. The wisdom and poetry books give the soundtrack of God's people in exile. Psalms provides language for every emotion. Lament in suffering, trust in God's shepherding, praise for his faithfulness. Proverbs teaches practical wisdom for living faithfully when the world doesn't make sense. Ecclesiastes wrestles with life. Under the sun, it all seems meaningless unless God is sovereign. Job tackles the hardest question: why do the righteous suffer? Job never gets an explanation, but he gets God's presence, and that's the point. Lamentations is the raw cry of a people who have lost everything, yet even there, great is your faithfulness. The post-exilic books show what happens when exiles return. Ezra and Nehemiah record the building of the temple and Jerusalem's walls, but it's a shadow of former glory. They're back in the land, but still under foreign rule. Esther is remarkable. God's name never mentioned, yet his providence is everywhere, saving his people from genocide. Daniel shows faithful Jews serving in pagan courts while holding fast to their identity, and his visions promise that earthly kingdoms will fall, but God's kingdom will triumph. How does this flow from what we've studied? Last week ended in a catastrophe. The kingdom divided, the people exiled, the temple destroyed, everything God promised seemed lost. But here's the crucial point. God hadn't abandoned his plan. The prophesied kingdom is the direct response to exile. The Abrahamic promises of land, descendants, and blessing seem shattered, but the prophets insist these promises still stand. The Davidic covenant, an eternal king, seemed impossible with no throne, but Daniel's Son of Man visions point to an everlasting kingdom. The temple was destroyed, but Ezekiel has envisioned a new one, and rebuilt the temple, reminded them God still desired to dwell with his people. The exile itself was judgment, but Jeremiah promised it would last only 70 years. The return showed God's faithfulness. God's people learned to trust not in circumstances, but in God's character. They learned to lament honestly and look forward. Finally, why does this matter for the holistic big picture? First, it teaches us how to live in the already but not yet. They're back in the land, but the kingdom isn't fully restored. This is exactly where we live, saved, but waiting for full restoration. The Psalms become our language. Second, it shows God's purpose extend beyond Israel. Daniel witnesses the pagan kings. Esther saves Jews in a foreign empire. Jonah is sent to Nineveh. The stage is set for a kingdom including all peoples. Third, it introduces messianic hopes that point to Jesus, the Son of Man, the suffering servant, the righteous branch. These images percolate through this literature, creating expectations Jesus will fulfill. Fourth, it proves God's word sustains his people through darkness. The exiles lost everything, but they still had God's promises, and those promises were enough to keep hope alive. So the prophesied kingdom leaves us waiting, hoping, longing. The stage is set. The question hanging in the air: when will the king come? That's exactly where we'll pick up next week with the present kingdom, the arrival of the king himself. Thank you so much for watching.